I'll quote William F. Buckley Jr., conservative political pundit, who once said, "I'm obliged to confess I should sooner live in a society governed by the first 2,000 names in the Boston telephone directory than a society governed by 2,000 faculty members of Harvard University." Right? Nothing against Harvard graduates, but he is talking about, right, the ivory tower and not being in touch with reality, and he'd rather be governed by 2,000 average Joes and Janes in the Boston directory, and I think he's on to something. I would just tweak it a bit, nothing against Harvard. I would say, I am obliged to confess I should sooner live in a society governed by the first 2,000 names in the Boston telephone directory than a society by those currently leading us in national politics. I rarely talk politics. I actually never talk politics. I almost never talk politics. Politics for too long has divided synagogues and Jewish communities. It's not going to unite us now. I'm not going to talk about politics because not all of us are liberals. Not all of us are Democrats. Yes, there are Jewish conservatives. Yes, there are Jewish Republicans. Teacher of mine, Dennis Prager, who is a Jewish Republican, has a radio talk show, and he was doing a talk show on Jews and liberalism, and a caller calls in and says, "Dennis, I'm a gay man, Jewish man. I came out of the closet years ago to my parents. They yawned. They did not care. Dennis, I'm terrified to tell them I'm a Republican," right? So politics and Judaism don't mix so well in this day and age, but it's hard not to at least address some of the big picture of politics after this past week. Probably the worst 2 weeks in my lifetime of political leadership, or a lack of political leadership. What a mess, what a sad reality that the greatest country in the history of humanity was partially shut down within hours of a complete shutdown, and for the first time in modern American history, almost becoming bankrupt, right? It was such a sad sight to behold, but not only just the facts on the ground and the issues that were being grappled with, but the way it was done, the mudslinging and the finger pointing and the vying for power and political jockeying and the arrogance, the lack of humility. It didn't, after a while, even feel like it was a Democrat versus Republican issue. It doesn't feel like we're arguing about the debt ceiling or about healthcare, Obamacare, or whatever the fill-in-the-blank issue is. It feels like there's something much more than partisanship and a divided Congress. It feels deeper. It feels like it's not about politics, but about the essence of leadership, or the lack of true, authentic, certainly effective leadership. And all week I kept turning to this poem. You've probably heard it. I kept turning to it over and over again. It just kept playing in my head. God give us men. I would change it to women, but I don't like to change people's poems. But we'll add in women. A time like this demands strong minds, great hearts, true faith, and ready hands. Men whom the lust of office does not kill. Men whose the spoils of office cannot buy. Men who possess opinion and will. Men who have honor. Men who will not lie. Men who can stand before a demagogue and damn his treacherous flatteries without winking. Tall men, sun-crowned, who live above the fog, in public duty and in private thinking. For while the rabble with their thumb-worn creeds, their large professions and their little deeds mingle in selfish strife, lo, freedom weeps, wrong rules the land, and waiting justice sleeps. It feels like it's time to put this in a newspaper with the caption above it, help wanted, leadership. Right? Leadership not just here in America, leadership in Israel, leadership in the Middle East, leadership across the world, in this community, in our lives. We are needing for leaders with vision, with compassion, with holy chutzpah, the ability to stand up for what's right against the popular opinion and sentiment. Leaders who can reach out across the divide, get past their particular needs, and think about the greater good. Leaders with true courage. Leaders who can, well, it's not exactly rocket science, lead. Leaders lead. And leaders like Abraham. And that's where I wanted to get to and talk about, because last week we met a man named Abraham and his wife Sarah, and they're equally both important figures. If we were to put out a help wanted ad a few thousand years ago, I think we would have gotten a resume back from Abraham. Probably Sarah wrote the resume, but Abraham would have been the one to hand it in because that was the world they lived in. And when we met him at the beginning of last week, frankly, it was an unimpressive resume. It would have just read simply, professional experience, shepherd. Formal education, Ur City College. Hobbies, smashing idols. But that was just the beginning. And then it was all uphill from there. This was a young man who had so much to offer, so much to contribute, and we've seen him over the past 2 weeks stand up and deliver. If we were to call one of Abraham's references, we'll call him Moshe. If we were to call him Moshe and say, we were calling about a reference, tell us about Abraham, what would his reference Moshe say? Moshe would say, Abraham is your man. Why? Because this man is a visionary. He's an entrepreneur. He's a self-made man. He left behind his home, left behind everything for a speculative business opportunity at best. He moved to this place nobody even heard of. He didn't even know where he was going at first, to Canaan. And when he got there, he found out it wasn't the place he thought it was going to be. It was barren. It was empty. So what did he do? He picked up his family and he went to Egypt to survive. He came back to Canaan, to Israel, and he not only settled there, but the man started not only one great religion or two great religions, but because of him and his wife, they created 3 great religions. But he didn't lose himself along the way. This was a family man. This is the first man in the history of humanity to start a religion with his wife by his side every step of the way, at a time when men did not treat their wives well, certainly didn't afford them the respect they deserved. Even in the text that we read today, we don't know Lot's wife's name because she obviously wasn't that important to Lot. But Abraham's wife, Sarah, she was there right with him at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, every step of their journey. He respected her and took care of her, and she took care of him. And this man, Abraham, you want to talk about kind and compassionate? We met him this morning, right? Sitting at the entrance of his tent. And it was just post-op. It was right after surgery. Do I need to tell you what the surgery was? He was 90 years old when he was commanded to self-circumcise, all kinds of techniques we have today. And yet, it doesn't keep a good man down, right? What does he do? He runs to greet wayfarers, as Rachel told us about with his nephew Lot. He runs to greet them. He gives them the best of what he has to offer. He could have been in his tent feeling sorry for himself or nursing his wounds, understandably. But that's not what he did. And that's not what Sarah did, right? They gave the world the best they had to offer. They got past themselves each and every step of the way. His friend Moshe would say, Abraham is loyal. He's the most loyal man you've ever met. As Rachel mentioned, he and his nephew had a falling out. He and Lot had a falling out. And he had every right to just kind of write off his nephew. But what happened when his nephew was kidnapped? Abraham took an army in, 4 armies, against great odds, probably overwhelming odds. He probably should have lost, but he didn't lose. And he didn't give up on his nephew. And he rode in and he rescued his nephew because he understood what it means to be loyal. And this man understands what it means to be faithful. God came to him, right, and said to him, Lech lecha last week, go on a journey, El ha'aretz asher areka, to the land I will show you. He packs his bags and he goes on this journey having no idea where he's going, but knows that he is willing to give God everything that he has, to the point where he almost sacrifices his son. Abraham, don't think for a second, though, is some religious, pious wimp. Far from it. We saw today a man with what I talked to Rachel about, holy chutzpah. The first person in Jewish history, in the Bible anyways, to stand up to God. I mean, think about it. God comes and says, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. It's a despicable place. And what is Abraham's response? Could have been like Noah. Noah's response was silence when God says he's going to destroy the earth, and that's frankly why Noah isn't chosen for the job to be the leader of the Jews. Abraham becomes the first Jewish defense attorney in history. He's litigating, he's defending, he's plea bargaining, he's trying to get God down from 100 righteous men. If I can find 50 righteous men, if I find 10 righteous men, please don't do this. You can't do this. Save these people. In the end, he couldn't find 10 righteous, but he fought for a cause. Even if it didn't succeed, he was willing to die fighting, die trying. He stood up for the underdog, the little man. That's who he was. That's what he did. But above all else, why hire Abraham to be a leader? Because Abraham was courageous, not some Hollywood kind of machismo, Charlton Heston coming down from the mountain courage. That's a different kind of courage. This is a deeper kind of a courage. This is a man who was courageous enough to stand up against popular opinion, peer pressure. It's as simple as that. When he lived in Ur and when he set out for the land of Canaan, the entire world around him called him Meshugana. They called him crazy, right? His family, his neighbors, his community. You're going where? You can imagine they said to him, to a land unseen. You're going why? Because you've had a a dream, a calling, right? You need lithium, not a walking stick is probably what they would have said to him at the time. You're hearing voices of a God. There is no God, or there are many gods, but there's certainly not one God, they might have said to him. You are crazy, you are a dreamer, right? They turned their back on him, they alienated him, and yet Abraham never veered from his path. Still set out in spite of the peer pressure, never caved. That's courage, right? That's true bravery. Now, don't get me wrong. Abraham was far from perfect, and we shouldn't expect our leaders, any leader, to be perfect. Did I mention that Abraham I did mention, he almost kind of, sort of, nearly offered his son as a sacrifice? Definitely not going to make the highlight reel. Or that when he went down to Egypt, he almost offered his wife, he did offer his wife Sarah to save his own neck. Not exactly a shining moment in his career. He had a child with Sarah's handmaiden. Fine, it was her, she pushed him into the situation, but come on. I mean, anybody would have known that this was a test to see if he was truly faithful, and on that one, clearly he failed. And yet another low light of Abraham's career is when he kicked Hagar and his son Ishmael out because Sarah was unhappy with the family dynamics, as I'm sure we could probably understand. But he kicked out his lover and his child, and they had to fend for themselves. This was not a perfect man. He was far from perfection. But that's not what we should be looking for in a leader. What we should be looking for is, and Abraham demonstrated, is a person who gets up time and again, who has the courage to put themselves out there, to make mistakes, to then own their mistakes, own their failures, own their imperfections, and that's what he does. And he continues to pick himself up after mistake after mistake. The rabbis say there were 10 tests of Abraham, and they debate how many of them did he pass and how many of them did he fail. But what we know for sure is that there were 10 tests of Abraham, and he picked himself up 10 times and 11 times in every single step of the way, kept going forward, kept moving forward. This is what made him great. This is what made Sarah great. This is what made them into authentic, real leaders. And this is what we need in our world now. Whether applying for a job leading the Jews, whether applying for political office, whether running a company, whether running a household, whether politics or parenting, whether Bible to boardroom to family room, whether you're talking about life in Ur of the Chaldeans or the Middle East today or Washington, D.C., or in this community or in our families or in our synagogue or in our lives, we need to look backwards at these examples of great men and great women and learn from their highlights and learn from their lowlights and learn from the examples that they have set for us. We need to remember what is possible. That's why we read these ancient texts, so we don't become jaded, so we don't start accepting mediocrity in our leadership and those who purportedly lead us, so we don't become complacent and expect other people to lead as we sit back and expect to follow. And this is really the point, isn't it? We make a mistake time and again as communities, as a society, as individuals. What's the mistake we make? We wait for a knight in shining armor to come rescue us. We wait for other people to lead us. But the Mishnah warns us against this. It says, "Uv'makom she'ein anashim tishtadel lihiot ish." In a place where there is no real man, where there is no real woman, where there is no real leader. Strive for yourself to be that man, to be that woman, to be that leader. Stand up, step forward, speak out, and lead. This was inspired within me this past week at the ADL event, the annual gathering here on the North Shore, the Leadership Award, where we celebrated a couple great leaders in the area, District Attorney John Blodgett and Carol Cohen. And it just reminded me of the importance of each and every one of us stepping up and stepping out and leading. The slogan of the ADL, or a slogan of the ADL, is don't be a bystander, be an upstander. Don't sit around and watch, waiting for other people to do it. Take it upon yourself. Maybe not to run the country, maybe not to run for Congress, but in your way, on your terms, in your life, speak up, step out, and lead. God give us men and women. A time like this demands strong minds, great hearts, true faith, and ready hands. Men whom the lust of office does not kill, women whom the spoils of office cannot buy, men who possess opinions and will, women who have honor, men who will not lie, women who can stand before a demagogue and damn his treacherous flatteries without winking, tall women sun-crowned who live above the fog in public duty and private thinking. For while the rabble, with their thumb-worn creeds, their large professions and their little deeds, mingle in selfish strife, lo, freedom weeps, wrong rules the land, and waiting justice sleeps. May each and every one of us have the holy chutzpah to step up. May each and every one of us have the audacity to step forward. May each and every one of us have the courage to speak out and take it upon ourselves to lead. Shabbat Shalom.